well-known player Joshua Schmidt, like he's been playing the game for years now. Joshua Schmidt, known as one of the you know up there pro players and all that stuff, has recently been banned from tournament play because he basically at YCS Utrecht in this past year, he got DQ'd from YCS Utrecht for marked cards. And this basically is a statement that E-Man Games had put out like way back when he did get DQ'd. So we're going to read over this real quick. So it says, "Attention duelists, this post is a statement about what happened to our member Joshua Schmidt at YCS Utrecht this past weekend. Joshua was playing Invoke Shadal with a record of 9-1 on Sunday. He got deck checked round 11 and called for investigation, being told his Pot of Desires, which are all old secret rares, were kind of yellowish on the top. We all know how cards can sometimes get yellow and stuff like that at the top. Joshua would receive a game loss for Pot of Desires a year ago at YCS Dusseldorf 2019. After that, he complained to a different head judge of that event back then who looked at the pots and said that he wouldn't have given him a penalty for that. But that's beside the point. Joshua replaced his cards anyway, and they were no longer the same Pot of Desires at YCS Utrecht. So he's playing with a different copy of Desires. The judge proceeded to tell him that he would be able to tell where the Desires are positioned while pile shuffling, even though Joshua can't see the top of the card/sleeves while pile shuffling. Joshua asked for proof of an explanation as to how he would take away an advantage from marking the cards, but the head judge denied with the statement that he would not have to prove anything to him. Josh then received a disqualification from the tournament. So Joshua Schmidt got DQ'd from the tournament for marked cards. Now, what you have to keep in mind, he was playing Salamangreat, and he had yellowish at the top Desires, and what the judge's statement was is that when you're pile shuffling, he could tell where the Desires were in the deck. So the only issue here, that because I had spoken to Joshua Schmidt after the tournament when he got DQ'd and whatever, I was there when everyone was talking to him about the whole situation, and he was clearly saying like, yo, when you pile shuffle, the top of your cards, realistically, the top of your cards are away from you. You don't see like if the card is slightly sticking out or whatever when you're pile shuffling, they're on the other side of you, they're away from you. So that was his logic as to why like it doesn't make any sense that the judge would DQ him for that, but the judge seemed to have a different opinion and all that. So anyways, the judge says he didn't need to like, you know, confirm whether or not he was able to discern them face down. All he had to do was say, yes, I could see them face down, that's it, that's all, easy as that. Now, we're going to go over the marked cards section in the policy document as well as in the penalty guidelines, and we'll see whether or not it was warranted that he get a DQ for this in the first place. So, a marked card is a card considered to be marked if it's distinguished from other cards in the deck without seeing the front of the card. So at any point, if it's face down, regardless of how you look at it, so even though, like Joshua Schmidt says, I can't see the top of my card, regardless how you look at it, if you can tell what the card is without it being face up, then it is considered a marked card. Warp increases discoloration, so the yellow is the discoloration. So basically, like, one of the examples is card with yellowed edges. So this is considered marked cards. Now, we're going to go over the different penalties that you can get for marked cards. So the different penalties you can get are marked card minor, marked card major with game loss, and marked card strict with match loss, and more often than not, that goes into a disqualification. So we're going to go over them, and we'll see what they differentiate as minor, major, and strict, okay? So just to outline what they show in the penalty guideline, because these are two different documents. This is the tournament policy as opposed to the penalty guideline. It says a card or sleeve is considered to be marked if it can be distinguished from other cards face down. Marking include blah, 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 same thing as the other document. There are three subcategories for marked cards: minor, major, and strict, which indicate the severity of the infraction. So to start things off, we have the marked card's minor warning. This is simply a warning. This penalty is appropriate when a duelist has minor markings on one or very few cards in their deck that show no significant pattern. So just to give you an idea, Joshua Schmidt played 2 Pot of Desires in his Salamangreat deck. So he had 2 marked cards in his deck, and they were both the same card. They were 2 Pot of Desires. If the marking's on the sleeve, the duelist should be required to change the sleeve, blah, blah, blah. But what's important is looking at this part. On one or very few cards in their deck that show no significant pattern. So the question here is, can you say that if you have 2 copies of the same card, but it's just 2 cards that are just like a non-engine card that help out the deck, can you say that they bear a significant pattern? Some would say yes, some would say no. This one's really up to like your own discretion. So examples here, a duelist has 2 random sleeves in his deck with minor wear and tear. The 2 cards in the sleeves bear no pattern. Would you say that it bears a pattern? I think in some way you could say that it bears a pattern because they're both the same card. He only plays with 2 copies, doesn't have a third or something like that. Duelist has 3 cards in their deck with no minor bends that can be noticed through the sleeves. The 3 cards bear no pattern. That's the example for a minor with a warning. So it is important for Judge to understand that patterns should not be presumed merely because the cards marked are good cards. So if, like, say for example, you're playing Salamangreat and your one marked card is your Gazelle. Like, we all know Gazelle is probably the best card in the Salamangreat deck, but it's not because specifically your Gazelle is the one that's like yellowed or something like that, that you should give them a bigger penalty, because it doesn't bear a pattern. It's just the one card, so it should be just a minor, you know what I mean? So the major with game loss, this penalty is appropriate when a duelist has a significant number of cards marked and a judge notices there isn't a significant pattern. So a major with game loss is what you give when you consider that there's a lot of cards that are marked, but they don't bear a pattern. So, like, you know, to give you an example, that kid at your locals that plays with sleeves that he bought 3 years ago and he's been playing with them every single day ever since, that would most likely warrant a marked cards major, because most likely that kid isn't marking cards to, like, you know, be like, oh, I'm gonna mark all my trap cards in my deck or something like that. But if every single marked card is a trap card, then it bears a certain pattern. But like that kid that just has 90% of his sleeves completely destroyed, you would probably issue something like this if it was at a regional, because you know, you don't have a choice. You can't be like, oh, I'm gonna be lenient because it's a kid or something like that. You can't be lenient like that at like a tier 2 plus tournament and stuff like that. So this penalty should only be applied if the head judge determines that the pattern is insignificant and unintentional. 2 cards, you can't really say that it applies to this. It is appropriate for a judge to allow duelists to change the sleeves in between rounds, as we've read before. Although this infraction assumes the marking is unintentional, any markings on a card or sleeve can give a significant advantage to a player, so it carries a heavier penalty. What you have to keep in mind, what they mean by this, is that whether or not it was intentional, it can give an advantage to either player, so you still need to give it, even if you wholeheartedly believe it was unintentional. It is very important for the head judge to investigate further to make sure the markings are not intentional. Kind of hard to do, but you still have to try. So I'll read one of the examples. The duelist has 12 sleeves with what seems to be wear and tear on the top left corner. The marking is on 8 of the 12 spell cards the duelist is playing in his main deck. The head judge determines the markings were made accidentally due to the way the duelist holds his cards. The duelist should receive a game loss for marked cards and replace the sleeves once the match concludes, and so on. Now, the penalty that was given to Joshua Schmidt was a marked card strict with match loss, and he got DQ'd for it. So we're going to read over this. We're going to see if we think that this applies to what happened to Joshua. So this penalty is appropriate when a duelist has a significant number of cards marked and a judge notices a significant pattern. So, of course, you can't take this like word by word and literally follow it to the T. Because if you do follow it to the T, then there's no penalty that says if you have like a small number of marked cards, but they do bear a significant pattern, then what are you supposed to do with this, right? There's nothing that you can realistically do. 2 cards, you can say that it's a significant pattern because they're the same cards and you only place 2 copies. This is really up to, like, it's up to the own person's discretion. Some people would say it is, some people would say that it isn't. This penalty should be applied if the head judge determines that the pattern is unintentional. So we're gonna go ahead and read the email and we'll see why exactly he was banned. So we're gonna look at this real quick. We're gonna take a look and see what the infraction that they are banning him for is. Your recent disqualification report from the event YCS Utrecht 2020 has been reviewed by Konami's Digital Entertainment Inc. KDE Penalty Committee. Based on the evidence of the incidents, the Penalty Committee has determined that a suspension is warranted. As of, that's in a week, right? No, that was 7 days ago. That was a week ago, sorry. You may not participate in KDE's organized play program until you have been reinstated following the end of your term of suspension. The penalty committee has made a determination of UC cheating marked cards, which carries a suspension length of 1 year. They have determined that he got a UC cheating disqualification due to the example here that says a duelist intentionally marks a card or cards in their deck, intentionally marked cards. This is the basically subsection of UC cheating for why Joshua Schmidt was DQ'd and therefore banned. Now, I think that one thing that's really important to know here is that one of the reasons why Joshua Schmidt was considered to have been cheating with this whole situation was that if you look at the statement that EMET Games had put out, Joshua had received a game loss for Pot of Desires a year ago at YCS Dusseldorf. So the judge that was there literally said, okay, I know that you had gotten a penalty for this at a previous event. So the judge kind of took that into consideration when applying the penalty. So one thing that I wanna like outline here: penalties may be upgraded or downgraded. Infractions should never be upgraded or downgraded. Upgrades should only be given to a person repeating the same infraction during the course of the same event. This is the important part, is that it specifies that if it's something that happened at a different event, you are not to take that into consideration when upgrading a penalty. Now, you can say that here, he didn't technically upgrade a penalty, but Joshua Schmidt was only given a warning, or was it a game loss? It was a warning or a game loss, something like that, but he didn't change them since then. He did change them since then. They were a different like set of Pot of Desires. So the judge here is in a way kind of, he's not upgrading the penalty, but he's taken an older penalty into consideration. And I think this section, when it says upgrade should only be given to a person repeating the same infraction during the course of the same event, it basically is trying to say you don't take into consideration anything other than a penalty that was given this tournament, and you don't look at like prior tournaments or stuff like that. Like, you can't, this is the same thing as saying, oh, this one player was banned like 12 years ago for 3 years for whatever reason, and then he comes back, and then like, oh, you catch him doing something that's like, you know, it could be just a genuine mistake, but you take into consideration, oh no, I knew that he was banned years ago, so I'm gonna ban him again because this is a repeat offense. You can't take that into consideration for tournaments like these. So when looking at all that, you could say, in a way, it really just is a question of whether or not you think that he deserved to get the match loss, first of all, for the marked cards, because the wording on it is multiple cards that bear a significant pattern. I don't know if you can say that Desires was multiple cards, but in some way there is no penalty that says few cards that bear a pattern, but it's 2 copies of the same card, and it tells, the policy documents do tell to not take into consideration the strength of a card. Like, we know Desires is a really good card in most decks, so you can't take consideration like that, oh, Desires is a really, really strong card, so clearly that's the card that was marked. So it's really a question of if you want to look at the penalty guidelines, and depending on how more or less you want to take into consideration whether it was a warning, a game loss, a match loss, if you want to follow it word for word. If you want to follow it word for word, I would personally say that it would be a warning because it was just 2 cards. You can't really say they bear a significant pattern because it really is just 2 cards. You can't have a pattern on 2 cards. It doesn't make much sense. So this really was just an upgrade, and the judge decided that they felt that he marked the cards intentionally, but they did take into consideration that he had been given a loss or a warning for it at a previous tournament. Using past infractions on Desires issues to say it was intentionally marked, exactly. They took a prior issue that had happened, and they're saying, oh, because this is a repeat offense, it has to be intentional. Because otherwise there's no real, like, you can't really back that up that it was intentional if all you have to like back up whether or not it was intentional was, oh, he had this one penalty a while back. So let me know what you guys think. Honestly, like, leave it in the comments. Let me know what you guys think. I really don't know what I would have done in that situation because it really is a question of investigating. Like, the investigation that the judges made afterwards, after giving the penalty, really are like at the core of what determines whether or not he deserved the ban or something like that. But in general, without having access to the investigation itself or stuff like that, you can't really make a decision in place of the judges. The judges were the ones that made the investigation, so they're the ones that get to, you know, make the decision on whether or not he should get banned or not. So let me know what you guys think, and that's gonna be it for me, but let me know.